This request came in by email. This person says, I've heard artists refer to the term tinting strength of color, but I have no idea what they're talking about. Would you please explain tinting strength? Well, let's put some strength in this. And when we use that term, tinting strength, we're referring to the amount of strength of the color within a tube. Now you might compare it to coffee. Someone who really likes their coffee dark, like I do, and someone who doesn't like their coffee so dark, like I don't know anybody, but anyway, if I put just a tablespoon of cream in each of those cups, mine is going to be darker in value than the weaker coffee. So it's going to take more cream to make mine look or appear the same color. So it's a similar type thing. We usually define tinting strength as how much white it takes in order to change the color, or how much color it would take in order to change white. Well, I'm going to show you how that works. So I have several examples here, so that because it's important. Because if you don't know the tinting strength of your color, you may really have a problem when you're trying to mix a particular color, or you're mixing two colors together. So understanding the tinting strength of every color you have in your tube is important. All right, so I have two here that are very similar to each other. One is the Rembrandt Viridian. The Rembrandt Viridian, of course, I use an awful lot. First of all, I'm going to put samples of them here to show you their normal color, or what you would see as comes out of the tube as to their color and their value. So I'll put that one there. Now rinse out the brush really good so I don't have any influence of the color in the brush. And I'm going to put another one beside it. They're very similar, two colors, and that is a phthalo green. So we'll put the phthalo green beside it and try to load it, and you can see that the phthalo green is a little bit darker as it goes. Not much. They're in the same value range. Now when you're doing tests to find out what your tinting strength is, it's a good idea that you can have a comparative test until you get used to it. And once you get used to doing the test, you won't need to compare colors. But all right, so now I'm going to show you what we mean by tinting strength. I'm going to rinse this brush out really good. How much white will it take to make these two the same value? That's the way we'll test it. All right, so in order to do that, I need to do, you might call it a chemical experiment, or controlled experiment would be better, where I will have the same amount. So I'll take the same amount of Viridian, put it right here, and I get just as close to the same amount as I can. I'll just go right here to do that mixing. I need to pick up that equal amount of phthalo green. Let's see, do I have about the same amount? I'll put it right here. Now that looks to be pretty much the same amount of both of those. Now I'll pick up the same amount of white for each of them. So let's see if you don't have to be absolutely precise, but in the neighborhood. So there's a nice little pile of white next to the Viridian, and get that same amount. See if I can pick up that same amount. Now, if you are, how do I say this? You tend to be a little bit anal. You might want to use a measuring device. I like to do it visually because it gives me, it's closer to what's happening on the palette. So first of all, I'll just pull all this together, pull the white and Viridian all together, and get a thorough mixture. Same amount of each, get a thorough mixture. And I want to check to see which one of these, as it comes out of the tube, is more powerful, stronger. All right, so that's a pretty good mix of those two. Now, I'll just go ahead and put a sample here so that you can see. I'll be sure I have that brush clean and well dried. I'm just going to go down in the row. So this is the Viridian row. And let's go right in here, and here's the Viridian with that same amount of white. All right, now that's, remember, Rembrandt Viridian. If you're accustomed to another brand of Viridian, it's going to start out being a lot lighter as it comes out of the tube. And so that's why I prefer the Rembrandt Viridian. It's the closest to the phthalo green. All right, so scientific, that was the word I was looking for. We try to be as scientific as we can when we're doing these control experiments, and we're trying to discover things about our color. All right, now let's pull these two together and see what happens. So I'm pulling the white in the phthalo green, same amount of white, same amount of phthalo green. You can probably already see it on the palette. Get those really nice and mixed. Then, with a clean brush, pick up the phthalo green, same amount, put it under the phthalo green here. Now you can see the phthalo green is a bit darker here than the Viridian. So now that tells me that phthalo green has a stronger tinting strength than Viridian does. It tells me that if I'm mixing paint, if I'm mixing phthalo green, if I mix it into white, it's going to take more white to get the phthalo green the same value as the Viridian. Or it's going to take less white, you can say it the other way around. So, well, we could take that one step further. How much more white would it take? Let's just do it this way. All right, so I put a little bit at a time, and this time I'll just do it by visual comparison on the palette. All right, you see that didn't seem to change it very much, did it? Changed it just a little bit. So, let's just put that down, wipe off the palette knife, and get another guy. I'm trying to pick these up in the same amount as I picked up the first one. And we'll put a little bit more. Now you see already, already I put 3 in terms of amounts or proportion. That's about 3 to 1 in terms of proportion. And there's the experiment right there. Let's see if that did it. Really, sometimes it can look the same on the palette, and then when you put it on the canvas, you'll see more difference. So I want you to see it both ways here. Now be sure that it's nice and clean, because you don't want what's in the brush to be influencing what happens. So I've got that nice and clean. Now let's see. How about it now? Well, let's put it right here. All right, now so I carried it it's almost the same. I carried it maybe just a little bit further, but in proportion, it takes about 1 to 3 in the amount of white that's required to raise the value of phthalo green, whereas it'd be 1 to 1 for Viridian. So you see, that's what tinting strength is. All right, let's show you another example, a different kind here. So again, this is always important to be sure that brush, you're either going to have to do, when you're doing these experiments, you're either going to have to rinse out the brush thoroughly each time, or you're going to have to use different brushes for it. And I think that's kind of silly to do. All right, so in always be sure the brush is thoroughly dry, because the experiment won't work if you have thinner or solvent in the brush. Right now, I'm going to just take this away. Yeah, I know, waste of paint. We're doing an experiment, folks, so you're going to have some waste anytime you do an experiment. And let's just get the worst of it up. And you'll see some staining there, because phthalo green is an especially staining color. Let's Gamsol spray in there to get the majority of it up. There's another test. I'm glad I did that so that you can see. Now this is a plastic palette I'm using here. If I were using a glass palette, I wouldn't have that. But with the plastic palette, you see the Viridian pretty much all comes up off the palette, but you can see that the phthalo stains the palette. So there's another test as to its tinting strength, that it will be, usually a strong tinting strength will be highly staining. Not always, but usually. All right, now I have 2 other colors over here, and let's take a reverse approach. These 2, you can see as they come out of the tube, they are pretty much the same value, and that's a good way to test. Be sure that if you're testing 2 colors, that they're at least the same value. and that the one that you add into it would be of a different value, at least for the testing to begin with. So these two, this is the Yellow Ochre Light, Rembrandt Yellow Ochre Light, and this one is the Rembrandt Cadmium Yellow Deep. All right, now let's see how much ultramarine blue would I need to change those to the same value of green. It won't be the same hue because yellow ochre is a slightly reduced intensity or reduced saturation color. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a little different this time. I'll just take the same amount of ultramarine blue, and I'll start out with something sort of reasonable. So I'll just put this amount of ultramarine blue there, and let's see if I can get the same amount right down here. Well, it looks like pretty much maybe a little bit more than that one, so let's go over here and add just a little bit more there. That pretty much is. Now let's mix those together. Just mix this one in here. Get it thoroughly mixed. Of course, it's going to produce an olive green because that's a beautiful olive green too. Anyway, because that the yellow ochre is a not the lowest by any means, but it registers as a lower saturation. All right, so that's the value. You look at my palette, which is about a value of 5 palettes. So that gives us about, with that amount, gives us about, in this color, about a middle value. So now let's see about the Cadmium Yellow Deep. Just be really, really careful in here. Don't want to pull any more ultramarine blue in it. I did put that on the palette a little bit close there, but let's just look at it. All right, now you can see it's almost all mixed. Do need to get a thorough mixture on these. All right, so I'm already beginning to tell which of those yellows has the strongest tinting strength. You can pretty much tell it on the palette. Oh, I neglected to put that's all right. You can see the same amount of ultramarine blue, and this one is still lighter than this one. And I will show you the example up here, even though I forgot to put the original up there. And I could do that, but I'm not going to. All right. All right. Here, this is the Rembrandt Yellow Ochre Light, plus the same about ultramarine blue. And I had the same amount of yellow ochre light on there. So I'll just go ahead and put that right here. Now let's rinse the brush thoroughly. Fresh paper towel. And be sure that all that color is out of there. And then we'll take the other mixture right here. This is the Cadmium Yellow Deep, and you can see Cadmium Yellow Deep is a little bit lighter. So that tells us the Cadmium Yellow Deep has a stronger tinting strength. In other words, it's going to, in order to make the same value of green for ultramarine blue, I need to add more of the ultramarine blue into it. Now, the tinting strength of the ultramarine blue matters too. So whatever color you add in there is going to matter an awful lot, because it'll take less of the stronger tinting strengths and more of the weaker tinting strengths. So let's just see. Let's see if I can pick up about that same amount. There it is, probably about right in there. Let's see now, what proportion of ultramarine blue would we need to add to Cadmium Yellow Deep to get it the same value, or in the same value range, pretty much in the same value. I believe that's it. You can see how now being informed about your tinting strength can greatly influence and make it easier for you to mix color, because then you'll understand that for some tinting strengths you'll need to reach for more in proportion to the amount of color that you have that you're mixing it into, whereas others you'll need to mix less. Now you see that did it. That pretty much is the same thing. So let me get ahead of myself here. Did you hear that? I am going to rinse the brush and thoroughly dry it and show you now. Put the two side by side. So we'll just put right under here, same thing. And then I'll put the comparison beside it, and you can see. Give you a little variation in method there. You can see that it also is really interesting, which does not have anything to do with tinting strength, but they almost end up being the same saturation. All right, here we go, right here and there. That is pretty close. These two are almost identical. So that tells us then, for these two colors, it's going to take 1:1 of ultramarine blue to get this particular mixture. It takes 2 parts ultramarine blue to this in order to get this particular mixture. Now I'm going to do one more that might surprise you just a little bit, or might not, just to be sure that we've driven the point home. I probably could start with this one, but I'm not going to. Earth colors tend, well, they do vary. But when you have earth colors as compared with the colors that are synthetic, you might call synthetic, are manufactured rather than being a natural, you'll find sometimes that the synthetic colors will have a higher tinting strength. So we'll try this here. Well, that's not necessarily synthetic, but manipulation to the color sometimes will cause a tinting strength to change. Now, what I have here, on this side I have the Rembrandt Raw Umber, and on this side I have the Rembrandt Transparent Oxide Red. Now let's go ahead and let's just pull those out right here. Go ahead and show you what they look like side by side. So we'll do that right here. This is the Rembrandt. Now this is trying to get that as near to how it appears out of the tube as possible. So we'll just put that right here. That's the Transparent Oxide Red. There we go, right there. All right, now rinse the brush thoroughly. You see, I like to rinse the brush. I get questions, so I might as well answer it now. I've got, in this container, I have a solvant. In this particular case, I have the Terpenoid by Weber solvant. Sometimes I use the Terpenoid as a solvant, and then if I need to add a solvent to my paint, I'll use the Gam salt. It seems to be purer. That just might be my imagination, but and I like to have the solvant in the container up to a point where I can reach my brush and push the brush against the side of the container, and that enables the paint to drop out of the brush to the bottom of the container. All right, so that was just bypassing a question that I knew I'd get from somebody who hadn't seen the others, the other quick tips. All right, go back to this. Now, this is the raw umber. Now, see that raw umber is a little bit on the stiff side, which means I have to pull a little bit more vigor. And here's the raw umber right side by side. You see they're pretty much the same value. You can see the raw umber being an earth color. Has more coverage, doesn't have the transparency. Okay, now how much white is it going to take to get those two the same value? So we'll do the same thing, only this time I'm going to make it a little easier on myself. I'm just going to pull, let's just pull, say, that much of Transparent Oxide Red, and this much of the same amount of raw umber. Let's probably take a little bit more right there. That's pretty much the same amount. Yes. All right, now reach up for the white in the same amount for each. So we'll just pull from right here, this little pile of white, set it down right there. Did I say that it's better to put before you mix them to put them side by side? Then you can gauge better the amounts that you're pulling in. Let's see, is that about the same as that? Yeah, that's pretty much the same amount. All right, let's just see, maybe a little bit more. I'll pull that off. Okay, here we go. Now I'll just take the Transparent Oxide Red first, and we'll just mix this white and Transparent Oxide Red, and we'll see what value those two amounts of transparent oxide and white, transparent oxide red and white, what value those two colors will make when they mix together. So there we go right there. And we'll do the same thing now for raw umber. Now you're going to find that your raw umber is going to vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. I don't know if it varies so much in tinting strength as it varies in color. My experience has been in some manufacturers the raw umber appears a little bit warmer than it does in others. It'll lean a little bit more yellow. All right, so if I pull all that into it, be sure I scrape that from the bottom. Be sure I have it. There we go, right there. All right, now if you squint at that, this in value seems to be a little bit darker. So let's put them side by side on our canvas here. All right, this is the transparent oxide red. And once again, same old routine. Rinse and dry, rinse and dry. Thoroughly rinse and thoroughly dry. Which is always a good practice when you're painting and you move from one color to another. Especially the thoroughly dry, because that's where a lot of people really mess up, getting too much solvent in their paint. All right, let's take this one now. This is the raw umber in the white. And let's put it right beside. There we go. Now, that's not a whole lot of difference, but if you squint, you can see that this is a little bit darker because this color leans more towards the warmer. In fact, this is not quite so saturated. I mean, this is more saturated, the transparent oxide red, meaning that it is less neutral. This raw umber tends to be more neutral. So we might be misled a little bit thinking they're about the same value because this has more saturated, has more of the saturated hue in it. What's the difference between saturation and tinting strength? Saturation has to do with how pure the hue is versus how neutral. The tinting strength is the actual strength of the color itself. All right, so that is a little bit darker, which means that this one has a stronger tinting strength than this one does. And let's just see how much stronger. In proportion, how much stronger is it? All right, let's get some more paper towel. And so I'm going to bring down the same amount of white again. There we go. That's about the same amount that I had before. Let's mix that in here and compare the two. I believe this one's going to end up being very close to the one above, the proportion. This is going to throw it a little bit lighter. So if you're using the same amount and one of the colors comes up lighter, then you start dealing with halves. And if it's so close that you have to deal in fourths, forget it. They're close enough so it's not going to cause that much of a problem. All right, we'll just put this one on the other side rather than to make another swipe over the raw umber. Well, first of all, I'm going to put it here just to see. Yeah, I'm going to put it right here now and compare it with that one. All right, so that means now what happened, it didn't take quite so much white. So we're looking at halves. So it took half as much. What does that mean? In order to have these, the tinting strength itself, this one, the Rembrandt Transparent Oxide Red, is 1.5 stronger, 1.5 stronger in tinting strength than the raw umber. Now, if it starts getting closer than that, as I said before, don't get upset about that, because it really won't. When they're closer than that, when they're that close in tinting strength, it really won't make that much difference. All right, now you should know how to mix two colors together and how to know how much of each color you're going to need in order to create the mixture that you want. That is, if you get to know the tinting strength of each of your colors. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com where I have full-length lessons downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.